Do you know the most interesting thing about being a designer in 2026? It's not about the tools anymore. I mean, everyone has the tools already, but it's the idea. And once you have the right idea, you could just use the tools to execute faster. And that's exactly what I did in this project. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through the exact same process. So without further ado, let's get into the video. I had an idea to create an ad, and my messaging was very simple: energy in every sip, and that was for Cowbell. So I needed to execute this idea that I had in my mind, but then I ran into some problems. I didn't really know how to get my images or how to put the images together, but thank God we have AI nowadays. I was just able to chat with an AI. So my first tool that I used in this project was actually ChatGPT. So in ChatGPT, I described my idea and I kind of explained everything that I wanted in a single image. So I wanted to execute that idea in a single image, but you know, AI is not perfect. Sometimes you give it a prompt, you have to prompt again. So this process was a very long one, and I was just doing prompting and editing my prompt and giving it back again, and actually landed on a very good prompt that I started with. I then took that prompt into Google Flow. Google Flow is this image generator. It generates images, it does videos and everything. You guys should check it out. So I used it right here, and you can see this was my first picture. You can see this is the first picture that I edited, but in this one I wasn't a fan of the background here. I wanted the background to be black, so it would be easier for me to remove the background. So I went back to ChatGPT again with another prompt. It gave me this. You can see here I told it to make the background black, and that's exactly what it did. And so I generated a bunch of images like this, and this one was really good, and that was really where I started to gain some confidence in my idea and actually executing this idea. So I gave it more prompts. So you can see here I gave it more prompts. So with this one I said, okay, I need a black background, so it did this black background for me. And then this is the base. This is where I started. But before that, I generated these other images too. So with this image, I really liked the triplets on the table. It was really a nice feature for me, and I was like, I need it in my picture. So I did exactly that. And so you can see here the drip is not there, but here we have it right there. And so I was able to get an image with the cup on the table alone, and also this one, so that in Photoshop I could just merge them together. So you can see I started with this, I had this one too, and so yeah, this is where everything started. So I started to have this idea, like someone getting energy, so someone running from drinking the cup of coffee. And definitely this is not how Cowbell looks, or this is not the color of Cowbell. This one looks more darker. So that was also an issue that I faced, and all of that was fixed in Photoshop. So after getting these images, the next thing I did was then take them into Photoshop so I can do my own edits and just edit around. So I'm now going to go into Photoshop, and then I'll guide you guys through how I was able to bring everything together. Here we are in Photoshop. Now, before every design project that I start with a mood board. Well, not every design, but it's very important that you start with a mood board. And mood board isn't something that you just gather and then copy from it. They are there to guide you so that you can make better decisions on your designs. So I had these mood boards here from Pinterest. These are just simple ads, or these are just ads that I got from online, and I just arrange them. Usually when I get my mood boards, I arrange them like this on the just in a file like this, so that it will be easier for me to visualize what I'm thinking. And another thing you need to note when you're doing mood boards is that you have to look at the background. So you have to consider things that you want to see in your design. So if you like a typography in a design, and you want to also implement that style of typography in your design, you can just copy that image. If it's the background, if it's the text, if it's the layout, there are a lot of factors that I usually consider when I'm selecting images for my mood board. So that's one thing you can keep in mind. Now this right here, this one actually got my attention. This image right here, it actually got my attention. So that is what I use as the base of my background. So I'm going to go to this file. So like every design, we start with a blank background, then we start building on it. So the first thing I did was create my background, and then to create the background, I just sampled this color right here. So you pick your eyedropper tool, or you press I on your keyboard, and I just sample this color right here. So I sample a darker color. So I kind of like the way the background is, it's from light to dark. And so that is what I wanted to implement in my design. So watch how I recreate it, or how I create something like that. So I sample the color right here by just pressing I on my keyboard to bring up the eyedropper tool, and then I sampled it right here. Then back here, what I did was just create a solid base. So I created a solid background. You can do that by coming to the adjustment layer here, and then click on solid color, and it's going to just apply the same background to it. Now the next thing I did was just add a new layer. So I added a new layer right here. Then I selected my brush tool. So I'm going to select my brush tool right here. Then I'm going to go back to my mood board again, and then now you can see it's not just from dark to light, it's a gradual process. So you can see the colors gradually increase in brightness. So I'm just going to select below that darker part. So I'm just going to select below that. So you can see my color picker here, it has been selected. So I'm going to go back to my artwork again, and then one thing I'm going to do is just going to paint just like that, but I'll paint towards the top part of my design, and then I'll move back to my mood board again, and then I come down here, select that color, and I'll go back to my design again. You can do that on separate layers, and that's what I'm going to do so that I'll have more control on each layer. So I'm just going to paint just like that again, and then I'll go back to my mood board again, select this color right here, and then I'm going to add a new layer. Then I'll paint below it just like this, and now we are going to select the brightest part, which is somewhere around here. So I'm just pressing Alt on my keyboard while on my brush tool. So I'm going to select Alt. If I press Alt on my keyboard, you are going to notice the eyedropper will appear, and then I'll just sample my color right here. And so I'm just going to add a new layer, zoom out a bit, and then I'm just going to add the final color. You can see there's a gradual process, but now here's the interesting part. Since we had them on different layers, we can now just take this layer, maybe shift it down a bit, take that layer, shift it down a bit, so that we can just have the style. You can edit the colors any way you want it. Now you can stop here and you can group them together, or you merge them. Usually I merge them, but if you still want to make edits, you can actually just group them by pressing Ctrl+G, and then you can have them whenever you want to edit, or whenever you want to move things around, you can come back to your group and you can do exact same thing. Now the second thing I did was just add these background elements. So these are just straight elements that I did. So one way of doing that is just just create a triangle, or a rectangle. Just create a rectangle just like this. I'm actually going to disable this, then I'll show you how to do it. And then what you can do is add a layer mask. So after adding a layer mask, what you're going to do is select your gradient by pressing G on your keyboard, or you come to your toolbar, you see it right here. And now just make sure this is selected, make sure it's from normal to multiply, and then make sure your gradient is actually black and white. So I'm actually just going to select this right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click and drag, so you can have something like this. And now you press Ctrl+T and increase the size of that image. And then what you can now do is just reduce the opacity of that. This is just to add some depth into the background. It is actually not going to appear very visibly in our background, but it's just something that you can add to improve on your design. So now that you know how to create all these background elements, I'm just going to replace it with what I had before. So this is what I had before. And then this image I got from Pinterest, and it's an asset that is just going to add a little more action into the background. And I'm going to link all the resources that I'm going to use in this video in the description. So if you want to get it and then practice, you can do that. So I added this right here. So usually when you bring it from Pinterest, it's going to be a very dark image just like this. And what I did was just clean it up, clean the parts that I didn't really need, and then just left the part. So you just add a new layer, add a layer mask, and then you just clean the parts that you don't need with your brush tool. And then what you are going to do is change it from normal to screen. And now it's going to remove all the blacks and then leave only the white parts of this image. I also added some light versions or some highlights into the background, or some glows. And one way you can do that, I've shown that in my other videos, you can check them out. One way you can do glows is just sample a color in that area, just like I've done. Change the blending mode from normal to screen, and then you're just going to click just like that. You can see the place is brightening up, or that area is brightening up. Now here, this is where we are going to bring in our images. Now the first image I had was this right here. So if I disable the layer mask, you can see from my generations, I mentioned I needed an image with the driplets on the table, with the drops of the coffee on the table, just something like this. But I didn't really need the background, so I just took out the background. And one way you can do that is just use your marquee tool. So to remove the background, just use your marquee tool right here. Since it's a flat space, you can actually just use your marquee tool, select the parts that you don't need, make sure your feather is about 5, and you're just going to add a layer mask. So you can see, so before you draw, make sure your feather is just 5, and then you can actually just click and drag. And then once you do that, you just add a layer mask. And when you do the layer mask, it's going to actually remove the part that you need. So another way you can do that, just invert the mask. So one way you can invert it is Ctrl+I, and now it has been inverted, and then we have the exact same thing that we had before. And then another thing I did was just darken it a bit. So I used the exposure. So I came to adjustment layer, then we have exposure. So I just kind of decrease the exposure on this right here, and then you can control it anytime you want. You can make your adjustments. And then the next thing I did was bring in my main image. You can see that I actually removed the background. You can see the background has been removed. Now I'm using an image from a different picture from my generations. You can see I took this image right here. So I took this image right here, and then I was able to remove the cap from it, and then I was able to arrive at something like this. And I'll link everything below if you want to check it out. So now the first thing I did was activate my image. And then another thing that is important, and I do that on my elements or my main elements, is adding sharpness to it. So this is just a simple one. You go to camera raw filter. What you can do is just add some detail to it. So you can see I just added my sharpness, and actually that was it. If you want to add any other thing, I actually added texture here just to give it some more texture in the image, and then I'll press OK. The next thing I did was trying to make sure that this image fits on the table, because when you leave it like this, it's actually just hanging over there. So this is where shadows and highlights are very important, and it's going to actually shape how this is going to look, and this is very important. So you can see I added my shadow here, and one way you can do that, I'm just going to recreate it so that you guys should be able to understand. So what I did was come to exposure, take the exposure, make sure it's clip max to whatever layer you are working on, and then just reduce the exposure. So once you reduce the exposure, you're going to have something like this, and then you press Ctrl+I to invert that mask, so that when you paint, you're actually going to reveal the dark parts or the shadows. But to do that, you have to make sure that this is on white. If it's on black and you paint, you're not going to see anything. But if it's on white, once you start painting, you're going to see the effects. So I'm just going to press Ctrl+Z, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to really just make sure the image is a bit darker. So I'm just going to paint the parts where the shadows are going to be when we finally add the shadows on the table, so that everything will sit on the table right here. So these are just some shadows, simple shadows that I'm adding right here. And when you are doing this, you need to pay very good attention to whatever you are doing and make sure that you don't do it too much. You can always reduce your flow right here, and then you paint more shadows in there, and make sure that this is white. Then just paint more shadows in there, just like what I'm doing right here. Perfect. And now you can see most of my shadows actually went into my drink. So I'm just going to cancel that, or kind of remove that right here. Very nice. So this was the first step to doing it. And now the next thing I'm going to do is actually just create make sure that this pops out more and it looks like the Cowbell coffee. So if I activate this layer, you see how I did it, but it's actually a very simple process. So I'm going to do it again so that you guys will see. So I'll come to adjustment layer again. I'll select my curves and I'll just make a simple S curve. So if I increase my highlights and then bring down my shadows, you're going to end up with something like this. And then I'll just invert my layer, and I'll press Ctrl+I to invert it, and then select my brush again, make sure this is white, and then I'm just going to paint back in whatever effect that I added. So I'm just going to make sure it's on the milk only, just like what I'm doing here. And you have to be careful when you are doing this so that you can get it right. And that's very simple adjustment layer. And now you can see this is the before and this is the after. Then the next thing I wanted to tackle was actually trying to make sure that the cap actually sits on the table, because this doesn't look natural at all. It looks artificial. So here comes the exposures again. You can see I did them already, but I'm going to walk you guys through how to do it. So the first thing I did was come to exposure again, make sure it's clip masked to your element. And then I'll make sure that first of all, I'm going to create a general shadow. When you put something on a table, you can see it casts a shadow. That's how light works. It casts shadow across. Now our light is at the back, so that means our shadow is actually just going to be flat on the table, just like that. If it was above it, somewhere around here, you'd see the shadow will be casted somewhere around here. But since it's at the back, our shadow is generally going to be right here. So when you activate your exposure, you're just going to make sure that you reduce the exposure to somewhere around here. And now since we are doing a general shadow, you don't actually need to clip mask it. So I'm just going to right click, and then I'm going to say release clip mask. So the next thing I'm going to do is just press Ctrl+I. Now I'm going to select my brush tool, and I'll increase it by pressing the brackets open and bracket close. That is the square brackets and square brackets close and square brackets open. Now I'm going to right click, and then here is very important when you're doing the shadows. I'm actually just going to squish my brush. You can see my brush is very round, but in this case, if I start painting the shadows, if I start switch the color and I start painting, you can see it's not going to be precise like the way I want it. So one thing I usually do is right click here, and then I'll just click on this. So you click and drag, and then just squish the brush a little bit. So you are going to end up having something like this. So now I can just paint on the parts that I really want to paint. And now this is a bit too dark, so that is one important thing about using adjustment layers. You could just increase the brightness a bit. And then I'm just going to add a second layer so I'm going to add a second layer so that it will actually just make sure the cap sits under the table or sits on the table. So I'm just going to come to exposure again, and I'm going to make it darker. So this time it is going to be way darker than the one we did before. And then I'll just press Ctrl+I on my keyboard, select my brush again. Now I'm just going to reduce the size of my brush, and then I'm just going to actually just paint under the cap just like what I've done right here. Now see the before we did our shadows. This is the after. You can see everything now sits on top, and if you think everything is too dark, just increase it a bit and you're going to have something very nice. So the reason why I'm using adjustment layers is that you can always come back and increase the brightness or reduce the brightness, and that's actually very good. Now that's my main image. Now the idea that I had in mind was actually coming together, and you can see with just a bunch of images, I think there's like 2 images plus our background, we are able to create something like this. So the next thing I did was bring in my text. So my text here, energy in every sip, and I use a font called Fredoc 1 or Fredoca 1. So the font is here, and I just added some small blending effect to it, or blending mode effect, and I'm going to walk you through that effect. So if I double click on this effects right here and then I hide it, then I hide this right here, you can see it's just a plain image, it's just a plain text, but I added a color overlay. So I added this color overlay, I added a gradient color overlay. So this gradient here, you can see I just sampled a color somewhere around here, and then the rest was just white. I didn't have to do the other sides because I just needed the this side to be a bit yellow or a bit brown. And this is all the settings that I had. These are all the settings that I had when I was creating this, so you can actually use this on your design. Now the next thing was the bevel and emboss, and the same thing here, not too much edit, just something to make the text stand out a bit. And you can also copy all these settings right here, and that was it. Now the next thing I added was this coffee beans right here. So I actually downloaded this PNG coffee so that it will just spice up the background. So this is where I usually start adding some effects or some elements to just bring the idea in more, just to execute the idea more. So I added this coffee bean again. You can see it was a lot, but I just added a layer mask, and then I maxed out the parts that I didn't need, and then I just placed it somewhere around here. And then I did the same thing right here, did the same thing. And now the next thing I did was just add glows on my main subject. This is what is going to grab the attention. So what you are going to do is create a new layer, and then I'm just going to go back to my brush again. Now here we still have our squishy brush. Now what you can do is just right click and then click on the soft round. It's going to go back to the normal brush again, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sample somewhere around here, and then I'll change my layer from normal to screen, or my blending mode from normal to screen. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click and just click on random parts that I really want to highlight, like the subject around here. And then this is too much, then I'm just going to reduce the opacity on that. And very simple, this is the before, now this is after. You can see it glows out, it glows a bit more, and it just brings out the image more. And then I added some more coffee assets around here. And the final things that I needed to add was just the cowbell, because this was actually an art that I wanted to create. So I actually added the cowbell sachet in there. So I actually added this right here, and then I just duplicated the same thing, and then I added it somewhere around here. And now, just like we did for the cup, I added shadows so that it's actually just fits on the table, just like it was standing there. And then the next thing I did was just darken this whole place up so I could add some more text. So what I did was just create a new layer, select my brush tool, sample a very dark color over there, and I just painted just like that. Very simple. This is the before, now this is the after. Very simple. And then I added these text. These are just some health benefits or things that is in the Cowbell coffee. So just add that little information over there so that when people see it, they actually know what it contains. And now I just added the Cowbell coffee logo just right here. Now our design is basically done. You can see I've just used 3 or 4 images to actually create this. Very simple, with just a few adjustment layers and adding shadows and highlights and glows. I realized that this cup was very clean in a way. So I decided to make sure that the Cowbell coffee logo, I just put it on the cup just like this, and I'm going to show you how I did that. So I just duplicated by pressing Ctrl+J on my keyboard, and then I brought it right here. Now if I zoom in right here, you can see if I leave it like this, it's not going to look realistic. And in design, everything, or when I'm doing my designs, I like to make things look realistic if I can. So what I did was change this from normal to multiply. So once I change it to multiply, you're going to see that it just becomes a bit, it just becomes more realistic. So one thing I do is double click on this layer to open the layer style, and then I'm just going to take this slider right here. So I'm just going to slide it up to the point that the logo starts disappearing. So you can see at this corner it is starting to disappear. And then once you notice that, you just hold Alt on your keyboard and then you click. It's going to break it into two, and now you click and drag and take this one back to where you got it from, and then you can now just adjust this one. This is just going to adjust the how visible it is on the element or the cap that I'm trying to put it on, something like this. And now this is the before, this is the after. Now this looks very good. Now the last things I added was a few glows. So I just added a general glow on top of this layer right here, just to make sure things are glowing a bit. And then I did the same thing for the bottom right here. You can see this is the before and this is the after. This is adding glows is very important when I'm doing my designs, because it just makes the design pop. I'm done with this design right here, and usually when I'm done with the design, the last thing that I usually do is just take it to camera raw filter and then add sharpness to it. So you come to filter, then you come to camera raw filter, and once you are in camera raw filter, the only thing you are going to add is sharpening. So I'm just going to increase the sharpness just like this. So if I zoom in, this is the before, this is the after. Just brings in that sharpness to the image, so that when you post it or when you put it somewhere on social media, it's still going to maintain the quality. Now you can see with just a few images, I had an idea. I was able to use AI to execute or get the images that I wanted to use, and with my touch, I was able to bring my idea to life. And that is very important as a designer, especially in these times of AI. It is very important that you utilize these AI tools. And this is how a lot of designers are able to 10 times whatever they are doing in order to be more productive and get more stuff done. If you enjoyed this video and also want to try this design out, I've linked everything in the description so you can go download it and go practice. And let me know if you learned something in the comment section. Share it with your friends, like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.